Welcome to the December Citizens Climate Lobby call. My name is Mark Reynolds. I'm a member of the CCL staff, and I'm happy to be hosting today's call. I want to thank everybody who's been participating in our year in appeal and everything you've been doing to encourage other people to participate in our year in appeal. You know, we had a goal of raising $300,000 on Giving Tuesday, and we raised over $400,000. Where we were as of early this morning is at $728,216 towards our goal of $1.5 million by the end of the year. So if you would continue to encourage people to donate, we would really, really appreciate that. We're about halfway there, and so let's keep going. What's going to happen today? Well, in just a couple of minutes, I'll be introducing our guest speaker, Isatis Cintrón, who presented at the COP26 event in Glasgow. After that, we're going to get a legislative update from our Vice President of Government Affairs, Dr. Danny Richter. Then we'll go over what we're doing this month, some of the things that happened from since last month's call, and which was actually the November conference, and then a little bit about what will be happening in 2022. I want to talk about Glasgow for just a second, because we had 15 badges per week, which is the most badges we've ever had. And we had a total of 23 delegates, which means that CCL had more of a presence in Glasgow than about 30% of the countries around the world. There were 6 of our team members who were actually representing their own country, and 2 of them who were negotiating on behalf of their country. We had 310 contacts with leaders that we tracked over the course of the 2 weeks. And one of the things that we do is we host something called the People's Pavilion, and it's really about making the whole COP process more transparent. And so we were streaming 3 to 10 events a day to make sure that people who couldn't actually come to Glasgow were involved in the meetings. And we also had meetings with 11 ministers or heads of states or their delegates. So it was a big thing for us. That's why we're really excited that today we have Isatis Cintrón with us. This is the 5th time she's presented. I've been at COP. It's the first time she presented to world leaders, and we'll ask her about that in just a moment. But she's also we also want to get her impression of what does she take away from the COP26 progress. But she's also a board member, a founding board member of Citizens Climate International. So we actually started a 3rd organization this year to support our work around the world. And that's because at this point, we have 141 chapters in 76 countries, and we did an organization that was just dedicated to supporting that effort, as well as our efforts in the US and the UN effort. Also, Isatis is working on her PhD on the cryosphere. And so we definitely want to hear a little bit about how her work relates to what we're doing here. So Isatis, first of all, welcome. So glad that you could join us, and tell us a little bit about what it was like presenting at the UN and who you were talking to and what you were talking about.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here with you guys. Thanks for the invite. So COP26, oh my goodness. It was such an awesome experience, and it's always great to be a part of the delegation of CCI, like bringing members like from all over the world. And then also we have our like our 5 areas that we're concentrating in, and I work a lot in the public participation. So as part of that, I am in the coordination team of the UN Education, Communication, and Outreach and Stakeholder Informal Group. So what this group is focusing in is about, bringing something that's called the Action for Climate Empowerment agenda to life. And this actually is very important to create like the governance and the transparency that we actually need to make like the Paris Agreement's goals feasible. So I was invited, from my group. They nominated me to be like the speaker in at the UNFCCC. And I was like, okay, like no problem. Like I created a speech. And of course, one of my goals is to bring visibility and priority to the vulnerable. So I couldn't miss the opportunity to talk about where I come from. I was born and raised in Puerto Rico, and we are like our coast, we are our mountains, we are our rivers and our people. So I took the opportunity to take the floor, because since we have a colonial status with the US, our priorities are not represented in the US climate plan. So I got my speech ready and went into the room, and there was so this is like the plenary. It's not like a normal room. So I've been in rooms and talked before, but this is the plenary. So this is where like the world leaders talk. So normally you will go and find the spot where is the label of your organization. And I couldn't find it. So I go in, like to the front. I was like, like where it is. And they're like, oh no, you will sit like in front of here. And like, if you have seen any of those pictures of the UNFCCC plenaries, it has tables and each one of the posts has like a microphone. So I was like, okay. And then they lead me to some chairs that are in front of all those tables. And there were no microphones. So I was like, like, how am I supposed to talk? And they're like, well, like, don't worry about that. We will escort you to the stage. So I didn't know that I was going to be talking on the stage in front of world leaders. So it was like, I was like, oh, okay, all right. So it was an awesome experience to be talking about like so many inspiring leaders and youth. So yeah, it was great. It was I was super grateful for the trust and the space to actually bring some light into Puerto Rico, which is normally not taught in these spaces. So yeah, it was an amazing experience.
Great. And so, mostly the press talks about what didn't happen there and that, the agreements aren't binding and stuff, but you've been there and you've been there the last 5 times. So what were your takeaways coming from this meeting?
Yeah. So we have a tough one here with COP26 because we set out, Alok Sharma selected that slogan was Paris promised, Glasgow must deliver. So I think the question is like, did Glasgow deliver? So it's like half and half. I think it's fair to say that COP26 didn't come without challenges, a global pandemic, and I think, it has been categorized like the most inequitable and inaccessible COP. So actually participation was really a challenge there. Even being there and having a badge already was a challenge to get into rooms. So that's something that we need to keep in mind, and that kind of translated into some of the processes and some of the things that we did not see happen. But despite all of that, I think that one of the key takeaways from COP26 is that climate change needs to be rooted in the subnational and communities, because our superpower are people. So we know our leaders were unfortunately not in crisis mode as we need them to be, and there was resistance, but Glasgow did set a path for us to follow up, and we have new commitments on adaptation finance by 2025. We also have the Article 6, which talks about, like all the carbon markets, and it has improved transparency. And also we have a mandate to create kind of a work program to operationalize the global goal on adaptation. And there's also a very important topic for the civil society this year, which was loss and damage. And this works with all those impacts that are far too wide and coming on like very quickly that the most vulnerable cannot adapt to. So there are some things, we're not near like where we want to be, but we have implemented, or adopted the Santiago network, which provides assistance to those countries to have access to capacity building, etc. So there are some progress. And additionally, which is something that I think was very important, is like to see parties and countries that were like reiterating keeping the 1.5 goal within reach. And for that, we have, or parties have agreed to revisit and enhance their 2030 targets by 2022. So normally they wouldn't have to revisit the targets until 5 years, so 2025, but they said like, we need to ramp up our ambition. And some of the things that I've been working with on Action for Climate Empowerment ACE, we did got the Glasgow work program, which implements like that part of the agenda. So we have work to do in the next year, and we can, like Glasgow set the path to like where we need to be.
Great. So I think one of the things that's really impressed me with CCI's work is its commitment to get citizens involved throughout the world. So, we've seen how that can work in the US because that's where most of us worked on it a lot in Canada. But CCI is really committed that, every country will have citizens involved in this process. And I think that's really, really impressive. You're also a founding board member of this organization that does work on the UN level, but also you've got 141 chapters around the world and 76 countries, and you're the regional coordinator for Latin America. Just tell us a little bit about how that's going and how you see it going.
Yeah. So it's super important. I think like it's like an extension of the work that has been done like in the US. I think some of the strength that Citizens Climate Lobby brings to the table is actually empowering the citizens or everyday people to create relationships with their policymakers and being able to advocate for better solutions on climate change. So like taking that to another level and being able to give people the tools to really bring this down and contextualizing in their own national ways, etc. I think it's super important. And then providing the access to people being able to know what's happening at the international level, at the regional level, I think create the synergies that we really need to advance climate action. Like for example, if we're talking about COP26, most of what happens there, even leaders from agencies, cities won't be knowing what's going on. Like they won't know what is their country's position. Neither would citizens. So how can we expect like the commitments to be, like held accountable and even supported, because we have capacity within our like different levels of governance. So what we need to be doing is really engaging at all levels so that we can make sure that we have the capacity and scale that these actions need to be happening. So I'm super excited to be part of this team and in advancing like real and just solutions. So that's some of the work that we've been doing. And we have also had this initiative that's called like Open COP. And the idea is to actually expand the civic space at the UNFCCC level. And what that does, is like to bring in more legitimacy, more robustness of the actions, and then transparency to the process, which is a cornerstone actually of the Paris Agreement. So this is all like reinforcing and bringing I think like it's unlocking, like the never ending capacity that we have in our society. And, there's like a lot of thoughts of speaking about whole of society approach. So I think like this is the way that we do it. Like we involve people and there is no way to get there without it. And I have recently started to play around and, like with Dr. Strain in the Avengers say like, like there's like 10 million like possibilities, but there's only one that we can win. The only one that we can win is if we involve people. So I'm super excited to be working in this and like bringing voices into the process. So yeah, like that's our work at CCI.
Nice, that's great. And now you're also a scientist and you're working on your PhD in the area of the cryosphere. And could you just explain to people what that is and how that relates to our overall work?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a scientist, I'm an environmental scientist. So that means I get to do everything. No. But we're very interested in all like the pieces of the climate and earth system. So what I do is focus on atmospheric chemistry in the cryosphere. The cryosphere is everything that's frozen. So that is like glaciers, that is ice caps, that is even like the snow that is like seasonal, that snow cover is part of the cryosphere. So what I study is like how are the pollutants, like the pollutants that we emit here through like the different sources affect the reflectivity of the snow. So when you have the snow, we know that it's white. So when you have a body, that is white, means that it is reflecting light. And some of this can be, taking into account, like if it's a hot day and then you're wearing like a black shirt, you would like, it will be hotter, right? So I study aerosols, and those are like very small particles, like even smaller than, like a strand of your hair. And this gets transported over long distances. And when they deposit in the snow, because the snow is so white, means that they dampen that whiteness. So that creates a way that the surface can absorb more heat. So accelerates melting. But the question is like, by how much, and like, what is the contribution to like snow melt? So the reason why I decided to study this is because we need every little bit of solution to really get to, mitigating climate change. And the cryosphere is our regulator of the, like over all our climate, weather, etc. So a lot of people ask me like, oh, like what is like a tropical girl like doing here in the cryosphere? And for me, like it begins in ice and then it ends in water. So that means, like sea level rise. That means, some of like losing some of like our beloved coasts, sea level rise and inundation, like flooding of our communities. So it's important for me to be like in ground series, like how are we going to solve this? And the aerosols that I study soot. So that is black carbon, which is like the formal term. It's a short-lived climate pollutant. So that means that its atmospheric lifetime is very short. It's a couple of days. So that means it's kind of like a low-hanging fruit. And if we were able to implement mitigation strategies that are effective, we could solve some of the issues very quickly, actually addressing, like short-lived climate pollutants, sorry, can reduce up to like 0.5 degrees by 2050. So it is a significant source to be addressing. And I think that in climate change, we need all cards. So that's how it relates. Like it connects to like our urgency and where do we need to be giving like action and priorities, like just like as part of our whole portfolio of solutions to climate change.
Wow. Okay, great. It looks like we've got time to get a few questions from the field. So let me just check with Flannery and see. I mean, so people, there's a lot of things you could ask. You could ask her about the COP meeting. You could ask her about CCI. You could ask her about the cryosphere. You could ask her about Greenland, probably.
Yeah, so one question, since you were just talking about the cryosphere, I'll start with this one. This person is pointing out that you grew up in Puerto Rico, very warm. Now your work is on these the frozen areas. So how did you make that connection and get interested in that piece of it?
Yeah, I think that as I say, like it begins in ice and ends in water, so it's ground zero. So I think we need to really be working at regulating our, kind of like our like Earth AC. So we need to be working here and trying to bring that into fruition, because if we work at the, like upstream enough, we can like save, like we're talking about communities, right? Like, so we're talking about like saving lives. So if we implement solutions like upstream enough, we're able to save lives down the line. So for me, it was very important not to only talk about adaptation, because we don't emit so much, but also how can I bring value into protecting small islands everywhere.
Flannery, let me ask a follow-up, then I'll turn it back to you. So you had mentioned that there are some ways to mitigate black carbon and short-term pollutants. And what are some of those?
Some of those, are in fact like removing. So it can be several ways. So these are filters through at the source. And then it can be like using different kinds of different kinds of fuels instead of fossil fuels. So like if we move to like renewables, right, like that will take care of it. And then like the way that we transport, right, like transforming our transport system, whether it's like maritime or cars, all of this, because soot comes from incomplete combustion. So this will actually generate, a change if we address like our, like kind of like our energy production, and then like transportation, and then like indirectly as well, if we mitigate, right, like if we mitigate, then because I work in soot and then also on dust. So the certification, like the expansion of the certification in areas because of like the global warming, like climate impacts, that actually creates more influx of dust into the cryosphere. So there's like a couple of ways, like, so it's like a feedback. So by addressing climate change, we can reduce the certification, which will be great. And then also transforming the way that we, everything, all of our system, energy, transport, etc.
Great. Flannery, what's else on your end?
All right. I'll give you this as sort of a dual question. So one is, what was your favorite part of COP26? And then what do you think needs to happen to make COP27 more productive?
Yeah. So I think my favorite part of COP26 will have to be at the end of COP26. There was something called the People's Plenary. And that plenary was from civil society. So everywhere, like from like the facilitators, which are normally UN people, were from civil society, and they created like this atmosphere, and like just bringing up about, like what are the things that are missing. And it was so powerful to be in the presence of, like indigenous leaders, civil society everywhere, that are calling on to more ambition. And then there was, a walk through like the venue, holding these red textiles, kind of like symbolizing, or not kind of like symbolizing our red lines and the things that shouldn't be crossed, so that we are actually acting to protect the people everywhere in the face of climate change.
Yeah, we do have time for one more, Flannery.
Okay, great. So you are also the regional coordinator for Latin America for Citizens Climate Lobby. So our most upvoted question, this person is asking, what are some of the challenges that you're seeing in other countries when it comes to citizens being able to lobby their governments, and how are people overcoming those challenges?
Yeah, that is a very important question, because in Latin America, we see that, some of the stats that we see are that people is like the most dangerous actually area to be an activist. So there are like a lot of persecution. So it's actually pretty hard for our like members, or just like normal citizens, to lobby their government, because sometimes there's like prosecution, etc. And the way that people are working in that is sometimes it's like making coalitions, and then try to work in issues that are inching into like more radical solutions. And then also passing, passing law. Like recently there was an agreement that passed, and it's like the only one of its kind in the world, that is called the Escazú Agreement. And this actually protects the rights of like environmental defenders against it. So it's like the only continent, right, like that has worked, or region that has worked on something like this, and it was ratified. And yeah, it's like trying to, so countries are like kind of identifying where they are lacking, and then trying to establish what is the framework to actually protect those that are trying to protect the environment, because protecting the environment shouldn't be like a death threat or a death sentence. So yeah.
Wow. Whew. Well, Isatis, thank you for your courageous work and for all you're doing. And thank you so much for being here. And I hope you can stick around for the next 15 or so minutes as we do the rest of the call. Thank you. All right, so you noticed that Dr. Danny Richter has joined us, who's going to be giving us a legislative update about where we are things. And spoiler alert, I think it's going to go till January, but let's hear from Danny himself.
Thanks, Mark. Geez, steal my thunder. Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to the call. I do want to provide a brief summary of where things stand as we see it, at least in the process of budget reconciliation. And the bottom line is that a carbon price is still a possibility for inclusion in the final reconciliation package. I would describe its media footprint as still being anemic, but that's probably still a good thing, as I've mentioned in the past. That being said, there have been some quotes in the media that I want to highlight. And I want to start with a quote from Senator Hickenlooper. The former governor here's the quote: "The former governor also doubled down on his support for a carbon tax, part of a broader shift in his environmental approach. He expects a fee on methane emissions is, quote, unlikely to be included at this point, end quote, but putting a price on carbon pollution would be better in the bill." And he gives the big picture as this: 50 years from now, we're going to be looking back, and this moment, I think, has the potential to be the point at which we say this was the beginning of the great transition. There was also a roll call article last week in which Senator Coons was quoted as saying, "I'm still optimistic that we will add a polluter fee to the Build Back Better legislation here in the Senate." And I just want to note that Build Back Better and budget reconciliation are two names for the same thing. It's the same bill. That roll call article also had a helpful quote from Senator Carper from his perch as the chairman of the Environment and Public Works Committee, which I'll note actually has jurisdiction over the methane fee. And this is how he described the process: "We are inside the 10-yard line," and he was hopeful of reaching the end zone. And in the article, this quote was actually in the context of talks related to the methane fee and Build Back Better generally. And here's another quote from Carper: "The question is, are we going to put a price on carbon? And that's something I support." Finally, and perhaps most interestingly, on Monday, Politico had a quote from Representative Tonko in the House saying, "I think some of the revenue stuff may require that carbon pricing come into the mix." And I found that particularly encouraging because this is on the House side, and Representative Tonko has been very important for Democratic leadership. He's been at the center of some of the climate efforts. And I would not describe Senator Tonko, at least from our perspective, as having been especially enthusiastic about a carbon price. So for him, his close engagement with leadership to be saying this, I think that that's encouraging. And so all of this is great. In terms of timing, and what Mark said at the beginning of this call, another very important thing that is going on right now is the Senate parliamentarian is doing her review of the major portions of bill text. It is our understanding that the parliamentarian review of the Finance Committee text submission, which is where a carbon price would come from if it is going to be included, was to start this past Wednesday. And we are expecting that that could take a bit. And the other thing that we're looking out for is Republicans will then have their opportunity to place objections to the final text. And then the parliamentarian will have to rule on those objections. And so that does, just with all this process and bearing in mind that the Build Back Better bill, this budget reconciliation bill, it's not all about climate. There are a lot of other priorities that Democrats are pushing that a lot of people care a lot about. All those have to be ruled on as well. Really, we're looking at January, I think, for wrapping up this process. So right now, we're still thinking January is the most likely time for a resolution. So in summary, we are still in this. The carbon price is still in this. The methane fee is still in this. Senators who are connected to the action are saying a carbon price and a methane fee are still a part of the mix. and we're not giving up on this reconciliation opportunity until we hear otherwise. And yes, January is probably the time for a resolution, so let's continue to hold on tight. And that's the update.
Okay, cool. Flannery, I'm going to ask you if there's a couple of questions that we want to take, but Danny, one thing about January, isn't there some hard deadline that kind of forces their hand in January anyway?
Well, we've had a couple of deadlines come, and so we've had funding the government, and we had a short-term postponement to that. We've had the debt ceiling, and just this past week there was a unique one-time agreement to require only 50 votes. So there were Republican votes to allow the votes, but it's expected that only Democrats will be voting to extend the debt ceiling. And so that it's expected to be pushed back until the end. But yes, I mean, both of those things are kind of end of January, and that's the expectation, that all of this will have to be wrapped up before Democrats find them in a position of pushing that back again.
Okay. Flannery, are there a couple of things out there that?
Yes. So one, you mentioned the parliamentarian, Danny, is evaluating things. Can you explain what's the basis for the parliamentarian's rulings on these things?
Yes, the Senate is subject to the Byrd Rule, and so the Senate parliamentarian is in charge of making sure that all of the provisions, all of the text that are in reconciliation are in compliance with the Byrd Rule, named after Senator Byrd, B-Y-R-D. And the purpose of the Byrd Rule is to, because budget reconciliation allows for only 50 votes, it's very tempting. And so the purpose of the Byrd Rule is to limit what can be passed within that opportunity. So it's not just a complete, there's only so much you can do. And so the Senate parliamentarian, her job is to make sure that the Senate is following its own rules. And you may have heard different terms. You know, this is the Byrd bath. This is a scrubbing of the text. And so the idea here is that you're scrubbing away or wiping away, cleaning away all the text that is not germane, not relevant, or is not in compliance with the rules that the Senate has set for itself over the years. So that's what the Senate parliamentarian is trying to do here.
Cool. Flannery, we do have time for one more.
Okay. This is one that just popped in. I'm going to ask this one. What do you think will happen to the price on carbon if it's passed, if and when Republicans are back in the White House or back in control of some chambers of Congress?
If we win and there's a price on carbon, I think that it will be impossible for and if there's a price on carbon with a substantial dividend, which is my understanding, that's what's been discussed, then even if Republicans take both the House and the Senate, in the midterms, President Biden will still have the presidency, and he will still have veto power. And so I don't see President Biden allowing something that is going to be the most important climate reduction tool in this bill. I don't see him weakening that. I don't see him getting rid of that. And so I think that, and you know, some of the things that Republicans could do is they could not fund some of the other priorities. And so some of these priorities you still need to appropriate for them, even if they're passed. But that's not the case for a carbon price. It's collecting revenue, and it's the price itself that stick which creates the emissions reduction. So it really works in a very different way, which is very complementary to a lot of the other priorities. And so if we win in the next couple of months here, I see that being in place for the next 3 years. And because there is a dividend, I see in that time people getting used to the dividend. And I see it being very, very difficult for any future Congress to reduce that or to take that away. And then when you add on top of that what the international community is doing, the fact that they're 34 out of 36 developed economies already have a carbon price, and that we would not be able to participate in get a pass on carbon border adjustment mechanisms if we don't have a domestic carbon price, I think it's a lock. And I think that it would be extremely difficult for a future Congress to weaken or remove the major provisions of a carbon price that make it do what we want it to do.
Great. Danny, thank you so much. Flannery, again, thank you for monitoring the questions on both speakers. Really appreciate that. Okay, let's talk about what we're doing this month. So the primary action, really the first two actions are tied together. The first is to set up a way to kind of celebrate what got accomplished this year and then plan next year. But we're recommending you do it in a particular way. You know, we'd like you to find some way to get together with your chapter, whether that's Zoom or if there's somehow you can do it conveniently in person. And we'd like you to talk about this year in terms of what did get accomplished, what you accomplished individually, what your chapter accomplished, what CCL accomplished, what the broader climate movement did, so that we can build on next year based on accomplishment, not just another year. We don't want to just do another year. Let's do something remarkable again. And so let's start by talking about, expressing, and celebrating everything that got done this year. But then the second part of it is we would like you to kind of ground yourself in CCL's values in how you plan the year. So if you look at our core 7 values, how can you use those to inform how you plan for the coming year? So those two, I believe, are very much tied together, and I hope that you are able to take some time to just not have another year happen, but see if we can complete this year powerfully and move ourselves very effectively into next year. The third action is a social media action, which is to just share why you work with CCL. And the last one is a communication exercise on practicing how you could ask people to support CCL financially. I mean, there's some people there, they don't want to give any time, but they could donate. And so that's what we're doing this month. And I certainly hope that as many of you as can participate in that as possible. So, you know, what we've mostly been focusing on in the organization in the last several months is the reconciliation process. So most of you are familiar with 160,000 plus contacts to the Senate, the House, and to President Biden, the over 3 million texts that have gone out, the over 300,000 phone calls that have gone to CCL supporters. But in the meantime, you've also been making some really interesting things happen. So for instance, last month, we hosted the November conference. Just for the live event, we don't have the numbers on the recording yet, there were 2,275 people who attended, and that included 14 countries. So that was a big deal. And there are 308 meeting minutes in already. I know there's still some meetings happening, so there'll be some more meeting minutes coming in, but our intelligence on the Hill said that aides had never been more exhausted, and they just didn't think we would get many meetings because everybody is so fried by COVID, so fried by reconciliation that we just wouldn't get that many meetings, but you do. You know, it's CCL, this is how we roll. So 308 meetings in already. Last year, we got 626 op-eds published. And when we did that, we said, nobody will probably ever do that again. I mean, that's such a huge number. There's diminished space in the newspapers anymore. There's not as much room as there was. There's some papers that don't publish at all. There's some papers that only publish once a week instead of every week. My own paper only publishes letters to the editors 3 times a week. So there's not as much space. Well, in the spite of that, this year so far, year to date, there have been 782 op-eds published by you. That is just a newspaper giving you a lot of room to make our case, and that's phenomenal. We still got a month to go, but we've shattered through last year's record. In addition to that, an additional 2,612 letters to the editor, which I also find remarkable, given there's just not as much space as there used to be to compete there for. On the social media side, our Twitter team has really turned into a force to be reckoned with. You know, I know that for a lot of us, it's frustrating when we see things in the media that are just not accurate or not characterized in the correct way. And our Twitter team has gotten really good at correcting the record, and they're really good at coordinating. So they're not all just making the same case. They will all be presenting different pieces of evidence to the same reporter or writer. And so both in the social media team and the traditional media functioning in a really, really strong way. We've gotten 979 endorsements so far this year. So thank you to all of you who've been doing outreach to influencers in your community. We're all closing in on 1,000 at this point. There's also another interesting thing that I noticed in the data this month. Some of you have figured out how to crack the code on tabling. In the first half of this year, there were 69 tabling events. So 69 for the entire first semester of the year. Right now, year to date, we are at 376 tabling events. So that means some of you have figured out how to get out in front of people in a time when it's been challenging. And for those of you who cracked the code, we're looking to hear from you because all of us want to be getting out there, reaching out to people and expanding our membership. Okay, so at the November conference, one of the things we talked about was a process for evaluating additional solutions we would add. And I just want to make sure that we all understand that this is a process of addition, not subtraction. We're not talking about abandoning something. We're talking about adding something. One of the things we've proven absolutely clearly over the last couple of years is that we can stay focused on carbon pricing while at the same time getting good bills passed in our secondary asks that help the climate. So we can stay focused, but we can take more on. So we've decided we can add priorities. So let's just go on to the assumption there is or is not a carbon price. If there is a carbon price, we're going to be working really hard next year to improve it, to increase it, to defend it, to tell the American people why this is so good for them. If there's not a price, then we're going to go out and get a price. But in addition to that, we found that we have the maturity, we have the strength, we're a complex enough organization to be focused, but at the same time, adding solutions. One of the things that I also let the membership know that in January of this year, on January 20th, our president, Madeline Pear, will become the new executive director, and I will join the Citizens Climate Lobby board. I'm very excited about that opportunity and looking for things I can do there. I think as a board member of CCL, you know, any nonprofit, a lot of the work is about fundraising, and this will free up a lot of my time to spend more money reaching out to donors and meeting with foundations, etc. As a volunteer, I'm going to be spending more time with CCI International because, as we mentioned, and what Isatis said is there's 141 chapters. We're in 76 countries. We have 2 staff and 4 contractors. I'm hoping that I can help Joe and his team build that out a little bit in terms of, you know, so that we can be as strong as we possibly can around the world. I think some of you are familiar with the quote from Charles Dubois, who said, the important thing is this, to be able at any moment to sacrifice what we are for what we could become. I have never met someone more like that than Madeline Pear. I mean, has just, from the minute she started working here, has just continued to push herself and evolve herself to be a match for the challenge. And I'm really excited to see what she can do as our new executive director. The other thing that I'm really excited about this transition is, you know, when I started at CCL, I was the boss on day one. I've only ever been the boss. I've never experienced anything else. I've never been a chapter leader. I've never been a volunteer. I've always just been in charge. And I'm excited that next year, in addition to being on the CCL board, I'll be able to call myself a CCL volunteer. I don't think there's a better title you could have than being a CCL volunteer, and I'm excited for that. All right, everybody, big year. Great job with all the work you're doing. Let's keep pushing. You know, I know we've been pushing and pushing and pushing. We can keep pushing till January. Let's keep our fingers crossed. Hopefully we'll get this in there. We'll see y'all soon. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Citizens Climate Lobby's training program. You can tune into more episodes anywhere podcasts are available. Inspired by what you heard today? Join Citizens Climate Lobby to advocate for bipartisan climate solutions. Go to community.citizensclimate.org to find more trainings, resources, your local chapter, national action teams, discussion forums, and more. Be sure to like our Facebook page and follow us on Twitter and Instagram @CitizensClimate. We also invite all of our listeners to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more inspiration. And together, we are creating the political will for a livable world.